All right, welcome everybody to today's seminar. Thank you for such a great turnout. It's fantastic to see you all here. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work and live, and recognise their continuing connection to the land, water and community. I pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. So we are very fortunate today to have Professor David Weaver here from Griffith University to present his seminar, which is titled Getting Published in Top-Tier Journals, an Incremental Approach. So Dave Weaver is a Professor of Tourism at Griffith University and has prior academic positions in the USA and Canada. He's the author of over 150 academic publications, including 80 full journal articles, of which 75% are A-star or A-level, at 54% A-star level. He has 10,350 citations, according to Google Scholar, and a H index of 44 and an I-10 index of 99. And I was doing the proofs to my manuscript this morning, and basically I added in a citation, which you have on number 9 on the core periphery model to bolster you up to 100 there on the I-10 index. So hopefully that works out quite well. He's also had an ARC Discovery Grant as well, which the only one I know of in tourism, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's focused on transforming visitors in natural and protected areas into lifelong advocates for conservation, which was quite a successful project in Lamington National Park as well. Dave now divides his time between Australia and China. He's one of the first Western scholars to receive a Yangtze River Scholarship supported by Dongbei University of Finance and Economics in Dalian. I'm very privileged to play a small role in what is a very big program there. And Dave's reviewed over 500 manuscripts for journals, but he only has a 3% acceptance rate because he likes to free up space for his own work in those journals. So I think that's an excellent strategy, an excellent strategic approach. So what I'd also like to say is the workshop is being recorded. We've got some folks listening in remotely, so I'd like to acknowledge everybody's attendance, thank everybody's attendance, and please just send through any questions you have through to, is it a Zoom chat? We have a Zoom chat happening here, and Kalisha and Michelle will pick these up and pass them on to David. So without further ado, Dave, I'll pass you the baton.
Thanks very much, Brent. It's interesting because the last time I visited this area, and I won't say campus, is because I moved to Australia from Canada in 1996. And I thought it would be cool to get a car and just drive around, and I was right up in this area, and I believe at that time there were a couple of earth movers around, and that was about it. So I'm very impressed to see how the campus is evolving. So, yeah, one thing I've been doing over the last few years is going around to different universities. So I've given a very similar talk as this to universities in China, Italy, Iran. That was really interesting, doing it in Iran. And it's constantly evolving. So actually the version I had sent here is a little different than some thought I just gave to it in the last day or so. So this is the most updated version of it. And why I call it an incremental approach, I think will become very clear as the time goes on. Well, what good way to start a presentation but with a bell curve. I think we can say that this bell curve represents all the publications that are submitted within any particular knowledge domain in the course of a year. And at one end is what I call the rubbish publications. And I definitely see it as I've done a bit of metrics analysis of the 500 manuscripts that I've reviewed because I kept track of all of them. Just thought that was a good idea to do that. There are articles out there, unfortunately. It is a minority, but it's articles that are going to be rejected however well dressed they are. Okay. So we're not terribly concerned about those particular articles here today. The other end of the continuum is a minority of articles, and I may actually be quite generous here. I'm beginning to think in my old age cynicism that the rubbish articles actually far outweigh the brilliant articles. But there is a small subset of brilliant articles which are likely to be accepted because they just stand out for their brilliance, and they'll be accepted however badly dressed. I'm not addressing those people either, okay, because you don't really need to dress it up. If you want to, that's great. And then there's kind of this big bulk. It's not quite half of the remaining manuscripts. It's probably somewhere around half of the old manuscripts. I call them mediocre. And this is a bit trickier to ascertain, but usually you're into about page 4 of the review before you realize it. Unfortunately, this is a mediocre article. And I think here that however well-dressed those articles are, there's probable rejection. And that has a lot to do with the acceptance rates that are occurring now, which gives a great deal of stress to a lot of people. In the tourism area, our top 4 journals, the A-star journals, according to the Dean's list here in Australia, is acceptance rates between 5 and 10%. So it's pretty discouraging. They're not likely to get in there however well dressed. So one thing I like to do when I do these kinds of, this isn't really a workshop format, but when I do those workshop formats, I get a sense of what people are doing, and we do perform a little bit of a triage where we say, unfortunately, I'm not sure that this is quite worth pursuing in a high-tier journal. So what are we targeting? We're targeting the 30% or so of manuscripts that I describe as promising. They have the potential to be accepted if well-dressed. Okay, so you can imagine those editors are out there and they're getting 3 manuscripts a day, and they can only publish around no more than 100, even in the online environment, out of 1,000 received in the year. And so they're looking at any excuse to desk reject the papers. So unless you're really, really well-dressed, even a promising article could be rejected. I guess the theme of my talk and why I call it an incremental approach is that there's a lot of tiny little things. If you want to be masochistic about it, it's kind of the academic death by 1,000 cuts. There's all these little things that can ultimately cause the rejection of your paper, but each of those can in turn be turned into an advantage where these things cumulatively lead to a promising paper being published in these kinds of journals. So that's usually the first thing I say, is that think about things that you're trying to get published and be honest with yourself. Where does it fit here? And if you have something that you think is promising, you'd be the best judge of that. Then it's a question of how you can dress up your article, put on your marketer's hat to some extent, and see how you can get it in the very top tier journals within your knowledge domain. My examples will be from the tourism area, which is my knowledge domain, and Brent's as well. But you'll have similar things that apply, I suspect. Well, in terms of the incremental things, this is the outline. I'll talk a little bit, first of all, about the context, which I'm sure in your various staff meetings and emails from people like Brent, that you become increasingly aware of the need to publish in these kinds of outlets. And we'll talk about things like selecting the outlets, the kinds of topics that you choose, structuring the manuscripts, and then something I call dancing with the journal. Things you need to do before submitting that a lot of people don't do but should. General principles of submission, and a very important one, responding to feedback. Well, we all know it's an era of intensive competition amongst universities for this thing called prestige. And why do you want to become prestigious? Well, it means more enrollments with better quality students, brings in more research money. It can lower an individual's teaching loads if you can demonstrate a capacity to get tier 1 income, for example. You can attract stronger faculty. So success begets success, but it can be difficult to kind of break through that barrier and start to be known as a prestigious university from a research perspective. I'd say there's probably 2 major indicators of prestige, and one certainly is publication in the high-tier journals. The other one, I suppose, is your ability to secure, especially Tier 1 external revenue. But you know, the two are interrelated. When you apply for the ARC Discovery grants and you have a really good track record of high-tier journals, that definitely increases your probability, gives you tremendous credibility. So there is a synergy there between those two things. And if you're an aspiring academic and you want to make a good academic career for yourself, that's something you should definitely do. It should be part of your portfolio of outputs. I'm not saying every publication, but I know lots of academics that I can say, oh, I know this person because of that one particular breakthrough publication that they had in an A-star journal. And then that kind of kickstarts their career, stimulates invitations to do a keynote, et cetera, et cetera. And then it might be most important of all, it builds confidence. Oh, I got an A-star journal. If I did it once, I can do it again. Okay, so it's really that question of breaking through, making this part of your portfolio of outputs. It's not just the era of search for prestige, it's also the era of metrics. We count everything. And this is an era where we can metricize absolutely everything. And so some of the things that we do now, because the reality is prestige, can be fairly easily measured. So the journals, they have their impact factors. Okay, and I don't think we need to get into explanation of what that is. I'm sure most of you understand that, but the editors and publishers of journals, they just stand on the edge of their seats during the time when the dreaded impact factors are released. And this is something that becomes a matter of great navel-gazing if it goes down and a great celebration if it goes up. Why do we count it? Because we can. Does it have faults? It has many faults. But nonetheless, we can count it. It's easy to do, so this is how we rank the journals. And as individuals, I hope you've all got your Google Scholar citation account memorized and that you have your page set up. Some people make it public, other people don't. I think it's an excellent idea to make it public if you haven't done that. But yeah, you can see all kinds of metrics here and you can compare people. And yes, this too is faulty. What if you're getting a lot of citations because your article was a total piece of rubbish? Everybody's citing it as how bad it is. Okay, that doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. And so it's not perfect, but the idea is that my 20% margin of error is the same as your 20% margin of error. So it gives institutions a good platform for comparing within their faculty. And all else being equal, if you look at people's citation counts, and I actually may be a little bit fixated on my own just in terms of analyzing what's going on, can tell you that the best way to amplify your citation count is get a good textbook done. Everybody will start, I have a generic tourism management textbook, and it's my #1 citation, almost 1,300 citations, just for that one thing. So that's actually a side, it sort of goes counter to this presentation, but if you want to get a big citation count, get a good textbook with a generic title. And I'll also tell you that half the people that cite it will never open it up. They'll just say, oh, it's about tourism management. He talks about this, this, and this, and so I'll cite it. And it must be okay because 1,300 other people have cited it. It's a very erroneous and weird business that we're in. But no, if you look at the top journal articles that are cited, in most cases you'll find that they are the top tier publications. Okay, and that's where people are going to really get to know your work. Now, just to give you an example from the tourism area, so what we know very, very well, I could get this information from anybody in the tourism area. These are our big 4 journals, and you'll have the same thing. In a bigger field like economics or marketing, you probably have a greater number of what in Australia we call the A-star journals. Okay, and so in our case, it's Annals of Tourism Research, Tourism Management, Journal of Travel Research, and Journal of Sustainable Tourism. You can see at least a couple of those impact factors are actually getting quite respectable. Okay, before they used to be quite low, but we seem to be evolving quite well as a knowledge domain in the tourism area. And that's putting it into the context of more than 100 refereed English language tourism journals right now. Look, if you desperately want to get a paper published in tourism, I could easily give you the names of 10 journals where I guarantee you'll get it published, and they probably won't even look at it. Okay, there's some really dodgy journals out there, which obviously should be avoided. All right, but getting to the meat, to this idea of incrementalism, I think right from the outset where people make a lot of mistakes is picking the wrong journal to submit your paper to. Maybe they just see that it has the highest impact factor and they say, oh boy, if I could land that one, that would really be great. But then you find it's inappropriate. To use those 4 journals as an example, each has its own what I call flavor. So Annals of Tourism Research was founded by anthropologists and sociologists. Need I say more? It is very heavy on theory. So unless you quote Michel Foucault a few times and talk a lot about social representations theory and postmodernism, you might not get anything accepted. You might even get a desk rejection, although you think this is the best thing that ever happened in tourism. Maybe your better choice would have been tourism management, as indicated by the title. It's always been very focused on the meat, what's going on in the real world. What are the managerial implications? Yes, it's good to have some theory in there, but that's not what the journal editors are really, really looking for to the same extent. Journal of Travel Research always had a reputation of quantitative research. So if you were really into a hardcore structural equation modeling or something, then this was usually considered to be the appropriate outlet. But now in some ways that's reversed, because I think the editor of that journal is aware that, well, I think I had a role in that. One time he overheard me say, well, I got to talk to this guy. He's the editor of the Journal of Structural Equation Modeling in Tourism. He heard that, and I think I wounded him quite badly, and then he realized he was publishing too much SEM stuff, and now he's encouraging people to submit good qualitative research, just to create some balance there. JOST, Journal of Sustainable Tourism, is all about sustainability. So if it doesn't, no matter how brilliant it is, theoretically, methodologically, managerially, if it doesn't progress the idea of sustainability, those editors are not interested in it. So right away I'm thinking, and I've done this with a lot of people going around individuals, say, oh, that's a really cool article. Where did you submit it to? Annals of Tourism Research. What's your theory? Well, it doesn't really have theory, but it's a really good article. They're going to reject it. Don't waste your time. Okay, so that's increment number 1, is picking the appropriate outlet. And then if we relax the A-star requirement and we put it down to the A level, then we have about another 8 or 9 additional journals that we could consider. And typically those tend to become more specialized, either topically or geographically, and could prove very appropriate for your particular topic. Let me reiterate, these acceptance rates are low and getting lower because of the sheer magnitude of manuscripts that are coming across their desks. So it's definitely below 10% for all 4 of these journals, and part of that's due to what I call the China push. I have an alternative name for that. I called it the Chinese tsunami, okay, for natural disaster people. I work a lot in China now, and just about every university involved in tourism there, that means we're talking something like 300 universities. Virtually every one is being told by the government now, you've got to go out there and publish in these top-tier journals. The Chinese language journals, they have their own hierarchy. They have several hundred journals, referee journals in Chinese. Quality isn't there. Their equivalent of RA stars are at about our B or C level, to be totally blunt about it. So they're being told if you want international credibility for your university, you have to play in the field of the English language tourism journals. So now what one editor told me is that about half his manuscript submissions now are coming from that one country, China. So that alone has kind of doubled the number of manuscripts that they have to deal with. And some of the universities, they can operate what I can only describe as a machine. They're putting large amounts of money in investment, having people that have impeccable English credentials to do the copy editing. Some Chinese universities are now saying, you get an article submitted in Annals of Tourism Research, will put 40,000 RMB in your research account, if not your bank account. So tremendous incentives for people to do that. Okay, and then ultimately what you also need to think about is your institutional expectation. Like I said, I think pretty much every university, certainly in Australia, is looking to increase its prestige relative to other universities, and there's so many ways that we count that now. And you have to think about your expectation as well. You have to somehow wed these two things together. Speaking in marketing terms, you have to think about the institutional brand, which I see as being an amalgam of all the cumulative individual personal brands. And you never know. If a university restructures or China decides to stop its students from coming to Australia because of our stance on the South China Sea, then you might find that you're looking for a job somewhere else. So you have to pay attention to your personal brand. And I think one of the best ways you can do that is to get published in the A-star publications. But you certainly need to know very clear, unequivocally, what does the university expect from you? And I know many universities, I just came from one in the United States, where people are perfectly happy to publish in the C-level journals because that's all they're required to do, as long as they can show it's refereed. You know, Australia, I think we're much more saying, no, can't just be any journal like that. It has to be at the higher tier. So no pressure there on any of us. Okay, now as far as the topic or content, remember that first slide, this idea of we're targeting here to your promising research. From the journal's perspective, they all say the same thing, rhetorically, that the article must make a significant contribution to the literature. There are various ways that can occur, and if you can combine a couple of these, all the more good for you. But certainly the big one everyone looks for is conceptual and theoretical significance for your research. Methodological. So I think most people, for example, are still using the standard SEM, Amos kind of thing for their multivariate research, and for a lot of journals now it's not good enough anymore. And one editor, who I will not name, will generally have a default option of desk rejection if you use a standard structural equation modeling. So unless it's sort of the newest generation, or it's in a completely novel application or something like that, they've kind of had it with that. So you've really got to think about that. If that's the core of your PhD is SEM, you've got to think about whether you're in the wrong path on that. And then managerial or practical significance, planning, management, marketing, policy, anything like that. Okay. Usually you would just have, but you need to think about, so what is the significant contribution of your research? What it is you're planning on submitting? From the journal's perspective, they would like that everything you do is radical innovation, where you make a giant leap into something wholly different. But we all know, even within that brilliance end of the continuum, that's only couple of articles a year would fall into that category. So although they would like us to do that, it's not practical. What we need is incremental innovation, but it has to be significant incremental innovation. Okay? So think about how your article is unique, how it's advancing the field, your knowledge domain, and you should be thinking, why does this deserve to get published? If I'm the editor and I come to you and say, why should I publish this? You have 1 minute to tell me. You should be able to do that without a moment's of hesitation. If you're hesitating, then you can be pretty sure that the editor will hesitate and might give you a desk rejection, and certainly the reviewers will hesitate. I think the problem is we get so close to something and we just assume it's significant and everybody appreciates the brilliance of what we're doing. But other people, not so much. What you invest half your life in writing, for an editor, that's one of 3 articles that they have to look at and make a decision. In our area, in our top journals, the desk rejection rate is approaching 30%. So I'm at a point now, I said this to Brent the other day, I broke out the champagne. Why? What happened? Oh, we didn't get a desk rejection. It actually got into the system. We could still get rejected, but it survived the desk rejection, and so right away I think, good, that 10% acceptance rate now just went up to about a 20%. And that's the way I think. Every little move you make, you just slightly increase the probability of a promising article getting accepted. in a very top-tier journal. But you have to think about what kind of incremental innovation that you're dealing with here, and you have to sell it to the reviewers and, first of all, to the editor, who's the gatekeeper. I tell you, topically in the tourism area, China and the Middle East are both hot topics in terms of regions. So if you were doing something about the development of mass ecotourism in Ecuador, or frankly anywhere in South America, I find the journals are kind of like, meh, not too interested in that. They should be, but they just don't see that as being that significant. But as soon as you say China, their ears kind of perk up. Because in tourism terms, China is definitely the global juggernaut of tourism in all its manifestations, inbound, outbound, and domestic. So there's a great dearth of knowledge about it. Same with the Middle East. There's a fascination, places like Dubai, but then not far away from it, you had the caliphate not too long ago, the IS caliphate, and to have such tremendous contrast within the region. But why does Dubai have so much tourism? So there's great curiosity about tourism in the Middle East and in Muslim regions in general, because a lot of people kind of shy away from that. Another thing to mention, one thing you should consider. Interesting. Thank you. Was that you? That was me. Not good. Another thing you should consider, and this idea of doing a review of a fairly popular knowledge domain, I think, is very compelling. One big reason for that is it doesn't cost anything. So if you've just had a rejection from your ARC application, and then you're thinking, oh, well, this gets me off the hook for doing any empirical research or anything. No. All you need is your computer screen, access to a good library and database, and you can do a knowledge domain. You just have to identify a knowledge domain within your area that hasn't been done yet. This is going to get you a huge amount of citations, and I'll just give you an example of that. Back in 2007, I was approached by the editor of Tourism Management, and he said, you know, you're an ecotourism guy, right? And I said, yeah, I'd like to think so. Could you do a review of the literature for us? And I hemmed and hawed because I thought, why do you really want that? And the editor was very honest with me. He said, well, everyone's going to cite it. If you do a good job, then anyone who does anything in ecotourism's going to cite this paper. So I reluctantly agreed, and so myself, my co-author, Laura Lawton, we were one of the first in tourism to write a topical literature review. Sexy title. You always have to have a sexy title. 20 years on, the state of contemporary ecotourism research. So it got published, didn't think much more of it, and then it's now my #1 referee journal article in terms of citations. It's almost 600. Okay? And then since then, it's almost 2 or 3 a year now, but I can say I did one of the first in tourism, and now it's just a question of identifying the right area. The following year, somebody wrote a review in a much sexier area, information technology and tourism. That thing is approaching 2,000 citations, for which I'm extremely embittered. But it's just the nature of the knowledge domain. So in your area, think about your own expertise. Think about a knowledge domain where you think, look, there hasn't been a review for quite some time now, and it's time to do a really good update, and it's always important here that you identify patterns, make it easy for people. Here are the 3 stages of the literature in franchising, or whatever your area is. And I dare say every one of you could go out and find an area, a knowledge domain, or more likely sub-knowledge domain that has not had an up-to-date literature review. Do it. It doesn't take you that long. Do a good job, you get used to doing it, you look at the patterns, and then you can use that for any work you do subsequently. You know, you can use that as a basis for your own literature review and such. But you will get abundant citations from that. Okay, these different journals, they love it because it generates citations, and the citations help to increase their impact factor, which means more money from the publisher. That's what it's all about, unfortunately. Another recommendation is do not slice the cake too thinly to maximize your publication outcomes. And I know many unfortunate examples of this where somebody took a very, very good piece of research and thought they were being very clever, and they divided it into 3 publications where it was very clear from reading each one it was incomplete. It wasn't telling the whole story. And they ended up getting 3 B publications. And I said, you should just go for 1 A star. The reason being that A star publication after 10 years could have 300 citations. Each of those B publications will be lucky to get 20 or 30, and no one will know anything about those publications. So you're better off, and I think it's a good idea to get a sense of the institutional pulse on that. How does your institution negotiate between quality and quantity? My view is that the priority should always be on the quality to get the A stars, because that's what generates the prestige. The quantity does not generate the prestige, okay? So that's something you need to think about very, very clearly. If there's pressure, oh, I have to get 4 publications within the next 3 years, as opposed to the institution saying, look, if you get 1 A star, that'll be considered the equivalent of that. Okay, that's the kind of thinking that you perhaps need here to inculcate. Now, as far as the structure of your manuscript, look, this is pretty basic stuff, but since I can tell you I've done 500 plus manuscripts now in the last 32 years, and I can tell you that these mistakes repeat and repeat and repeat. Even where, look, I can tell you about 1/3 of the papers I know who the authors are. So much for double-blind review. But you can tell. There's lots of ways that you can tell, and if you know the area, of course you're more likely to know who the author is. It's a paradox of double-blind reviewing. But in your introduction, this is where you have to do your sales pitch and convince the reader that your research is important and worthwhile to have a look at, and more importantly, to get published. So you need to start by summarizing your basic problem area, so that why should we be concerned? Okay? So if I'm doing research in China and I'm talking about something to do with Japanese atrocity sites in the north, why is that an issue? Well, the issue is because there's simmering geopolitical tension between Japan and China these days, and these atrocity sites are areas or venues of propaganda dissemination, where if you want, you can turn on the interpretation to create people that when they leave that museum, they're ready to tear the Japanese flag apart. You know, so it's not an innocent process. Why should we be concerned about the basic problem area? And then you hone in on to your specific issue that you address in your paper. Why is your topic within that problem area important? So to look at domestic Chinese visitors to a Japanese atrocity site and to find out what kind of emotions they experience and what kinds of intentions toward Japan that they carry with them when they leave that museum. You need to state your purpose and your objectives very, very clearly. Usually the purpose is an overarching thing, and objectives are specific parameters of that purpose that you can break down into separate areas that you can look at kind of individually, but ultimately collectively. I could say of those 500 papers, wouldn't be more than 5% that do everything that an introduction should do. And this is when you make your sales pitch. Emphasize how your research is innovative and rigorous. There's 2 things. It can be innovative, but if it's just a hunch, people aren't likely to publish it. But if you can show how it's rigorous, that you use some good qualitative and quantitative techniques to meet your objectives and fulfill your purpose, that's good. And all this should be preceded, as I said before, with a nice title, something that's catchy. And then simply provide an outline of the remaining sections of the paper. So this is what people want to see. Wow, then I get excited as a reviewer about reading the rest of the paper. Otherwise, I'm thinking, well, if this is how they write the introduction, how am I possibly going to get through the rest of the paper? It's a sales job. It's the equivalent of a vacuum cleaner salesman putting their foot in the door, right? And possibly making the sales. Like in your literature review. So this picks up on some of the things I said about doing a review of the literature. Cover your topic thoroughly. And because there's so many articles out there now, in our case, over 100 English language journals, Unless there's something where you can see, oh, an article from a B journal that already has 200 citations. It does happen. And usually you'll become aware of it when you start reading the material and you start seeing it reappear in the reference lists. But generally, if you look at those top 4 journals, you're going to pick up most of the really important stuff. And then if there's a B level or A level journal that covers that knowledge domain specifically, you need to look at that too. But if you can identify patterns in the literature, so this is as a prelude to your empirical research, that sometimes alone is what's going to make your article desirable to be published and what people are going to cite. So you don't actually remember that you surveyed visitors to the Liushun Museum, but you had a great literature review looking at the relationship between dark tourism, emotions, and geopolitical impacts. And you were the first person to kind of define that. And what you need to do in your lit review primarily is to identify major gaps in the literature. Because if there's a gap and you fill it, then that is a form of innovation. Hopefully radical, but more likely incremental. So you need to demonstrate the importance of your research to avoid the editor's "so what" response. In your methods, there's some interesting things here. Actually, this is an area where I think people tend to put very little detail in the methods and a lot of detail in the results, and I think that's exactly opposite to what it should be. Your methods should provide detail, and I always get people saying, oh, I did a content analysis of interviews using NVivo. I bet they did. Okay, doesn't everybody kind of say that, but they used this, which is far better than NVivo. If you're going to use NVivo, as a reviewer, I really tweak the beard and I say, how did you use NVivo? Please be specific. Because the members of your audience would very much like to also use NVivo, but they would like your expertise as to how you used it specifically. And then that article never comes back for review because they just kind of made it up. Oh, I'm supposed to say that I used NVivo for my qualitative review. Same thing, content analysis. We know the whole debate that occurred years ago, the different types of content analysis. Be clear, what kind are you using? What levels of content analysis? Why are you using that approach? Okay, because the editors more and more, they want tourism to at least have the appearance of being a scientifically rigorous area. And so you've got to think about replication, where somebody can look at your data and use the same methods and come up with the same kinds of results. These days, I think multiple methods approach is really preferable, including triangulation. So you can conceptualize that something like this, that if you say one is maybe a quantitative instrument, so Likert scale, standard, things like that. Two might be some accompanying open-ended statements, and three might be some follow-up interviews or some participant observation or something. Well, where all three intersect and find the same things, that's extremely powerful in terms of reliability and validity, and yet each at the same time is offering their own additional flavor by merit of the uniqueness of the methodology employed. So this is where people, they slice their salami too thinly and they think, oh, well, this one I'll do the quantitative and the other one I'll do the qualitative. Reject, reject. Put them together. That's what the editors are telling me too. They're saying we'd love to see these people put the quantitative and the qualitative together in some kind of triangulation, and don't try to chop it up into really small pieces that make a very unsatisfying sandwich. Now in your results, as I said, keep these descriptive, because I find people just chafing at the bit. They put something down and then they start right away getting into the analysis. That's what the discussion section is for. So in your results, keep these descriptive and keep it very, very simple. This could actually be one of the shortest parts of your article. And you look at a lot of scientific publications, this is what you'll find, where basically it's a few sentences saying, well, we reject the null hypothesis based on our findings, and then they spend 5 pages talking about the implications of that. The other thing people do is they think, oh, well, I've told you my main story and it isn't very much, so I better stuff more stuff in there. That is diverting. Okay, that just diverts attention away from your main results. Don't start reporting information just because you have it there. Okay? The stuff that's not as important will just divert attention. It'll dilute the impact of the important results that you're trying to present. Then in your discussion, you always have to link back to the literature review, which a lot of people don't. This is when you really need to go back and carefully read your literature review and then see the results that you're showing. How does that amplify and how does that improve? How does that enhance the existing body of literature in your area? So you clearly identify the gaps that have been filled. A lot of people do that. You have to read it as a reviewer 5 times before you see, oh yes, you've answered that. Make it very clear, make it very explicit how you filled the gap and how you are making a significant contribution to the literature. Can you introduce any new terminology? This is kind of like a holy grail, I think, for academics. For example, that term I mentioned, dark tourism. Okay, so that term was coined in 1999 by 2 British academics who used this. They thought it was a great term to describe attractions that are related to death and suffering, usually of people, but it could also be animals, presumably. Everybody uses this term. Another crew tried to come up with an alternative term, thanatourism. Never took off. Thanatourism or dark tourism. Dark tourism sounds much sexier. So that paper right now has around 2,000 citations. It's not a particularly good paper, but whoa, people just got blown away. So when you do any research in dark tourism, you reference this article. These are the people that coined it. My own personal thing in life that I always regret is I came very close to coining the term ecotourism back in my master's thesis in 1983, but I didn't quite get there. I talked about ecologically sensitive tourism in my master's thesis. Why the hell couldn't somebody have tapped me on the shoulder and said, well, just shorten that to eco, and that'd be ecotourism. And that paper would have 3,000 citations instead of 3. So, hey, but I'm saying, look, you're academics, you know this area. Sometimes it's really great to do this at the university pub over a beer or two. And just brainstorm about these things with your co-author to say, look, is there some really interesting terminology that we could introduce here that kind of captures the essence to it and excites people about it? And that's really dressing up your paper really well if you can do something like that. But you should at least consider the possibilities that something like that may exist, and that really gives strong value added to your paper. Now in your conclusion, again, a lot of people just sort of dance around the conclusions, but I think it's usually good here to synoptically link your findings back to the general problem that you started with, kind of like an alpha omega thing. Acknowledge your limitations. Academics are tremendously reluctant to do this. But if you don't acknowledge the limitations, then as a reviewer I say, well, there's no limitations, so I guess this is a perfect article. And of course it isn't. Every paper has limitations. Acknowledge them. Because part of what we do is we know it's just a little snippet, an attempt to capture some appearance of reality. And we know we could have done things better. So what were our limitations so that we can warn people next time? You know, for example, with the research we did in China, it's really interesting. We asked people their age. Okay, how old are you? And they just had to put a number in. So we got the results back and we found something very funny. You'd see a lot of people would say, oh, I'm 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. It's unusual. 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. What they were doing, they were giving us approximations of their age. So they were saying, oh, whether they were 38 or 42, they were just telling us, no, I'm 40. And I asked my colleagues about this in China, and they said, well, they don't know who you are. They don't really want to give you any more information than they have to, so they're probably BSing you. So then what we did is we just, from here on in, we just give the age categories. And they're perfectly happy to say that they're between the ages of, say, 36 and 44 or something like that. They'll check the right box. But they won't give you their specific age. None of your business. Okay, and you know, with a very controlled society like that, I think it gives them a little bit of anonymity and an ability to sort of, you know, buck the system a little bit. Same thing with education. You know, we were finding this doesn't make sense because we asked, what's your highest degree of educational attainment? And 85% had at least a bachelor's degree, but the funny thing was that about 30% of them were currently in university, so they didn't have their degree yet. So they were telling us what they were trying to attain rather than what they actually had. So we just openly acknowledge these things to say, if you're going to go in China, there's a different way that you would ask the questions to get at it, because you've got to think about a very different cultural milieu. So it's kind of counterintuitive, and look, if the limitation is really huge, well, we made up half the data, then obviously that puts you back in the rubbish category, and one would hope one would never submit anything that does anything like that. And then suggest areas of follow-up research, and normally that stems out of the acknowledgement of the limitations and things that you could have done but you didn't have time or resources to do it. So what are the follow-ups? Now, dancing with the journal. So at this point now, you've really structured your manuscript well. You have a very compelling story to say. You've picked the right journal. Now you start the dance with that journal. How many of you can honestly say that before you submitted your article, you had a look to see who was on the editorial board of that journal? Some of you do that? Okay, a few people. I won't say who doesn't do it because no one's going to put their hand up. These days, think about the dynamics. There are hundreds of journals out there, thousands upon thousands of manuscripts being submitted, and you have to find, the core of the whole process is to find 2 or 3 reviewers. So I was at a point before I started making it clear that I was going to be retiring pretty soon, that I'm not going to do this anymore unless you pay me. Then I stopped getting requests. So I thought publishers are making a lot of money from this. So why should I waste my time, doing, one year I had 45 reviews I did. I just felt it was my obligation, and I thought, no, it's a form of exploitation. So it's hard to find reviewers. That's just the reality. So what they do, they make kind of a deal with you. They offer to put you on the editorial board, which is what I call a minor indicator of prestige. Okay, universities like to show all the different journals that they have people on as members of the editorial board. But they say, okay, in exchange, we want you to do 3 or 4 articles a year to review them. So if you were going to do something on ecotourism and you were going to submit it to tourism management, if you look at the editorial board, which has about 60 people on it now, there's several ecotourism experts there. I can almost guarantee you that they'll be asked to review the article. Now that's you're guessing, but in a sense, it's a complete contravention of the principle of the double-blind review process, because in essence, you know who's going to review it because of the nature of the editorial boards. Make sure you cite any of their publications that are relevant, and try not to trash it too much. If you can, say something complimentary about those articles. Because as much as we like to say it's all a rigorous, objective scientific process, that's rubbish. Human ego plays a huge role in this. And if there are any editorial editors of journals here, you'll start cringing right now, or your nose will start twitching and getting very angry with me. But it's true. People look at ego. I consider myself an expert in ecotourism. If somebody writes a paper on it and they don't cite my article from 2008, well, look, that's the most prominent ecotourism review article in the entire literature, and you didn't even bother to cite it. How much do you really know about this area? Okay, you kind of feel it's like a slight, but it's your ego, in a sense, taking over. So look at those people, look to see, make sure you've got some of their citations in there. If it's not relevant, don't force it, because people can see that you're forcing it. But just have a look and see if there's room to put that in there and it's relevant. By all means, include those people. That just automatically puts them in a better state of mind. They've been working all day and they're doing this for 1 hour from 10 to 11 p.m. and they see they've been cited in a positive way. Wow, I can increase my citation count if this article gets published. Yeah, it's dirty, isn't it? But it's the reality that we live in. Read widely from that journal to get a sense of what accepted articles feel like. So probably the commonest question I got is, well, here's my manuscript. Can you have a look at it and maybe see, like, is that worthy of getting in a top journal? I say, read the journal. Those have been accepted. You can get a sense of structure. You can get a sense of the writing quality. You can get everything you need is in those articles. So just take a day sometime. Phone in sick. Look at the most recent volume of the journal that you're publishing in and just carefully read those articles. What's the last time you've carefully read a whole article and it took you half a morning to do it? No, because we're busy doing small things. Take the time, because then you get a feel of what an accepted article feels like. That's part of the dance with the journal. And I could tell you, an Annals of Tourism Research paper is totally different than a tourism management paper. You wouldn't know that it was the same knowledge domain just in terms of the writing styles. Cite the relevant articles from that journal. And I see that a lot where somebody submits, let's say, an ecotourism article to tourism management, and there's no citations to tourism management. I think you could argue that's a form of disrespect. Well, you want us to publish this, but we have a lot of articles about ecotourism, and you don't even have one thing from our journal published. So you don't know our journal, and you're not showing any respect for it. Even if you need to go, you can get on the websites and you can see everything that's published, and you can quite easily identify. These days, it's very easy with our computer technology to get a list of all the ecotourism stuff that's published in the particular journal. Have a look at it. Some you might not want to cite, but some of it certainly would merit citation if you haven't done that. Also, if the journal editor contacts you and says, well, could you please review a manuscript for us? Don't say no, because if you don't do them a favor, why should they do you a favor? So look, if it's in the balance, we're making a decision of desk rejection or putting it through the process, and oh, yeah, that's the one. Twice they rejected our requests to review articles. Reject. Okay, it's human nature. So get involved in that process, because then you can experience, you have an understanding of how that peer review process works. You're part of it. And then you can empathize. If you're grumpy at 10 o'clock at night reviewing somebody's article, then you can empathize that other reviewers will be grumpy with your paper. And that gives you an incentive to see how you can improve it, so it doesn't get to that point. Now, before submitting, I recommend not to add to your workloads any, but conduct an internal non-blind review. So if there's two of you collaborating here on a paper, before you submit it, get somebody that you respect, somebody you think can do a good job, even if it's not their knowledge domain. Because don't assume that your reviewers are going to be in your knowledge domain. Some people will assume, oh, they know tourism, which can be anything from soup to nuts, but they'll say they're a tourism expert, therefore they'll get it. So get somebody to do an internal non-blind review, because they will definitely, as much as you think this is a brilliant article and beautifully written, if they're honest with you, they'll come back and they'll say, look, mate, there's some real problems with it. Here's what you need to do. If they catch it, one of the three reviewers will probably catch it too, maybe more. So do that to catch things before you submit it. And of course, then you have to be willing to do that for other people. Back to the title. Ensure that the title is catchy. The abstract clearly indicates or states directly the importance, innovation of the research, and that's because you want to avoid the desk rejection. These busy editors very often are basing it just on the title and the abstract. They're not even opening up the actual manuscript. So your abstract has to be, need to put a lot more attention in your abstract than most people do, because that might be the basis for desk rejection, where they say, well, it doesn't say anything about your theory in the abstract. We're Annals of Tourism Research. We like theory, so we desk reject it, and we make our workload easier. Look, obvious thing, ensure that nothing in the manuscript identifies any of the authors. The commonest one is where you give a surname and you say in press. Well, I would think it would only be the person who submits the article that would know that that's in press, so then you know who the article is, and sometimes the editors will reject the manuscript on that basis. oh, we can't do a double-blind review process here unless you go and remove all these self-references. And that's the other problem about cutting the salami too thin, is that you usually link to a previously published body of literature, so that that basically gives away the authorship of the current manuscript. It's another reason not to do it. Follow the submission instructions exactly. A lot of people have the idea that, well, you know, I've got sort of a standard way of doing it. I like using APA style and British English. And if they like it, then they can come back and tell me, no, no, you need to use Harvard style and American English. But again, that's kind of like a form of disrespect. And I've been in situations where some journals have very, very idiosyncratic and outright illogical instructions for submission, but follow them exactly. Okay? Editors look for that to see, because then they think, oh, well, maybe it's just a manuscript that you're sending to a whole bunch of different journals sequentially, and you're not really paying attention to their specific parameters. It's respect for the journal, and it's part of the dance. General principles of submission: always professional appearance with excellent English expression and no typos. And my colleagues in China, this is one of the things that they prioritized, was to get some people that had superb, absolutely superb English language skills, so that you couldn't look at it and say, oh, this was written by a non-English language author. So they're willing to invest the money in that, to give some assistance on that, to make sure that the English expression is really, really good, that there's no typos in it. You know, it's like when you're at an interview and somebody looks at you and says, oh, look at that. He's got a little bit of mustard on his lapel. And you start looking and you start finding reasons why you don't want to offer the job to that person, because there appears to be a lot of little sloppy things that all add up. But if you have a really excellent expression, no typos, the right formatting, that's an indicator, isn't it? When you go to buy a house, you look and you see the small details. Well, if the lawn is so well kept, it probably means the plumbing is great too. But if the lawn is a mess, I can almost guarantee you the plumbing's going to be a mess too. Don't buy the house. So if the grammar is garbage in the paper, right, or careless, shall I say euphemistically, then probably the whole research process was done in a sort of a sloppy way. And if I'm a tired editor late at night, reject. Okay? People do this all the time, because I think in most cases it's done because they just think, well, look, you know, the review process these days can take 6 months to a year. So I'll send it to 2 journals simultaneously, and maybe one will reject it and one will carry it through. But editors find out these things. I don't know how they do it. Mental telepathy, osmosis, I don't know. But they just seem to have this radar out that they know, oh yeah, so-and-so is notorious for multiple concurrent submission. No, you got to wait one at a time, because otherwise you're involving 6 reviewers or whatever, and then they don't like that when you waste the time of reviewers, that it's not going to be considered for that journal. Responding to the feedback. I think this is probably the last area that we'll look at. Well, look, like I say, if I don't get a desk rejection, I feel very comfortable and confident that it's gone through. But even at that, if it doesn't ultimately get rejected, these days, the commonest response you're going to get from your editors is still wants a major resubmission. Don't be discouraged. It means that the door remains open. The editor at that point is saying to you, you know what, this has the potential to be published. The editor at this point is clearly signaling that you're in that category that we're targeting, that you're in that promising category. But you can't predict what the reviewers are going to say. Some of it's a little bit predictable, and some of it is just totally off the wall, and you think, what? Are you sure they read the same paper? Like, what are these idiots thinking? That's how we all get, right? You get these reviews, and some of it's condescending, some of it's insulting, and you really get just all your emotions kind of come forward. No, when I get a request for a major resubmission, we bring out the champagne. Because psychologically, in my mind at that point, that article has been accepted. Okay, and I've never had a situation where that was untrue. One of the editors, Journal of Travel Research, said to me, you know, a very unusual thing, 2/3 of the people that I tell them major submission never bother to resubmit. And I said, why? Did you do any analysis of that? Get a sense? And he said, not scientifically, just anecdotally. Ask people, why didn't you resubmit? Oh, we were so discouraged by the comments, or we didn't think we could meet them, or we were just insulted by the tone, or we just took it and decided to submit it somewhere else, which is fine ethically to do that. You don't have to resubmit it. Well, I think that's great from my perspective, because that means less competition for those 100 spaces a year if people have that attitude. So by all means, if you get bad reviews and they say major submission, just toss it in the garbage, please, after that. But look, we all get severe criticism, and in the publishing game, you have to have a thick skin. You got to get over the thin skin. We all have it. It's our immediate visceral reaction, but you have to get past that and think, wow, the editor is saying this is promising. The reviewers are saying, yeah, it's pretty good. And they probably did this at 11 o'clock at night and were grumpy. But they're also saying, and the more comments you get, the better. Because, if they don't really like it, they'll just say, look, the literature review is kind of meh. The methodology isn't clear. This needs to be clarified. Well, that's not good. It means they're kind of dismissing it. It's putting it at the bad end, the mediocre end of promising. But if they make a lot of comments, your reaction is, oh my God, how do I do this? But I'm thinking, no. They like it enough that they bothered to read it and come up with a lot of specific comments. And the message they're sending to the editor is, we want this published, but there's a lot of things that need to be done. So what I can tell you, and most of you will know this, is the process of, you could get 3 reviews back and tremendous criticism, but they're all saying has potential, it's promising, needs a major resubmission. It can be just as much work to do that major resubmission as it was to write the whole article originally. And that's, I think, another reason it puts a lot of people off. Now they're on to the next thing and they just don't want to be bothered with it. Especially if maybe it's to the 3rd journal that they submit it to or something. Work really hard to address all reviewer concerns, even if you disagree with them. And see, one thing I can tell you is everything I'm telling you here could be easily worked into a whole workshop on its own. Because there's a whole psychology of reviewer concerns and how you deal with them. So usually they'll start off with something saying, look, this is a really good article. There's some really interesting stuff here. Needs work, but has a lot of potential. I put that down in the field where you respond to the reviewer comments. I put that down and I say, thank you. Because do you think the editor is going to remember the positive comment? Okay, since they last looked at it, they've reviewed 200 more manuscripts. They're not going to remember, so you're reminding them of the positive things that the reviews are saying, and you're just putting down, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And then, well, look, sometimes there's contradictions among the reviewers, and I love to point those out. So somebody told us we had a beautiful little story about an ecotourism site in China, and I love that story, but one of the reviewers said, this story doesn't appear to be very relevant, please remove it. So I'm pointing out in my review that, well, the other 2 reviewers did not request that this be removed. So in a very polite way, I kept it. And sometimes a reviewer will say something where they don't understand the methodology. So you want to say, this person is a bloody idiot. How could they not see it? It's done perfectly well. Why don't you get better reviewers? No, don't do that. Say, we appreciate your comment. There may be a misapprehension here, and we've improved the quality of the grammar of the article so that the point is completely clear now. Thank you very much for pointing out the need for clarification. And I'm thinking, twit. But you can't do that in the reviewers because you're at an emotional high right now when you're responding to these things because they're attacking the core of your essence. You're trying to crank out these high-tier publications and people are telling you, well, this is just mediocre stuff and it needs a lot of research that you think is totally irrelevant. Look, it's an art, and I could get into it for the next hour. There's not time to do that, but if you show me the comment, I'd show you how to respond to it, where you can get it through. Some cases, people are making excellent suggestions, and you say, great, thank you very much. I wasn't aware of that source. I've incorporated it, and you have really helped me to improve the article. Thank you. That's great. In other cases, they want you to do a whole different study, in which case you just point out gently that, well, no, I'm sorry, this is not the purpose of the paper, and this will be done in future research. This will be a follow-up, even if you do it or you don't. Say that. That looks good. Look, the point is, when the editors get the reviewers, not all reviews are equal. You know, we tend to think, oh, well, there were 3 reviewers, so one likes it, one doesn't like it, and there's one in the middle. Not true. So if I have somebody say, look, I reject this article, I just don't like it, and that's it. That's not going to carry anywhere near the weight of somebody who says, this is a really good article, but here's 10 different things that you need to do to improve it. You can tell that somebody actually read it and has really good feedback. The other person just kind of glanced at it, didn't like it, and gave some bad feedback. So they will prioritize their reviews on that. So when you get your reviews, you can look at that and you can see maybe 2 of them say really negative things, but only in a couple sentences. And the editor's telling you, no, please go ahead and make the changes because one of the 3 reviewers made really good comments, and that's the one that they'll respect the most. So yeah, bring me back and I'll have a whole seminar ready for you showing all different kinds of comments. We could talk about how you would respond to those criticisms so that you please the editors. Even how you think about how, right now, before I show you the next slide, think about how you respond to this. So do you do something like this? Well, yeah, always be polite and professional, even if the reviewers are twits. Okay, let me get back to this point. First, I just want to show you this. This is how I set up my feedback. So the first thing I do, even if, you know, when I get the feedback, I don't want to even look at it for a couple of days, but I usually try to get at it as quickly as possible. You know, when you fall off the bicycle, you got to get back on it as quick as possible or you never get back on it. It's the same thing with doing reviews. Put everything else aside, call in a sick day, and start working on your review, your response to the reviewers, okay? But here's what I do is I isolate every discrete comment. And in some cases, I think my record was 50. I could see there were 50 different comments there. And a lot of them were just things like, oh, well, you're doing a singular apostrophe rather than a plural apostrophe. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Easy fix. And I make a nice big deal about how I very nicely addressed it, showed respect to the reviewer. But then a lot of them are tricky. Like, so this is an example. Page 14. Okay, comment 1.2, because look, another reviewer might make the same comment, so I just say, please see my response to the comments to comment 1.2. So I don't have to repeat everything. So the comment was verbatim. On page 14, how did you generate your random sampling of email addresses? You argue why you did it, but not how. This has been clarified. I give the page numbers. I always put the page numbers in the final manuscript. Don't put them in right then and there because it's going to change as you make more revisions. And then I give the new text I put in, and I actually then say where it is, and I put it in yellow here and in the revised manuscript so the reviewer can easily see where the changes were made. A very simple thing, but you're making life a lot easier for the editor and for the reviewers, and you're showing respect to the whole process. You're saying, I want to get this published, and I'll do what it takes to get it published. So then I show the new content that I did, and then subsequent new text then describes how the same technique was applied to the main survey. Note that the company preferred not to reveal the actual software used because there was a question about, well, what software did you use? Well, our company didn't tell us. It was, information that they weren't going to divulge. But let me get back to this point here. Okay, so I believe that when you're in this promising area, so forget it, if you have a rubbish manuscript, no matter what you do, it's not going to fix it. If it's brilliant, you don't have to pay too much attention to this. If it's mediocre, think about a B-level journal or possibly some of the A-level. But if it's in that promising area and you're quite convinced it is, then I don't think at all that your acceptance rate is between 5 and 10%. I think it's 1 in 2. If you do all the things that I'm telling you, see, it's an incremental approach because there's a lot of little things, each of which notches you up a little higher. I'm certainly not going to guarantee that you're going to get it published, but I'll tell you what, 1 in 2 is a heck of a lot better than 1 in 10 or 1 in 12. So I think it's a really useful thing to do, and it's just a wonderful thing then when people contact you and say, wow, read your article, thought it was fantastic, starts to accumulate citations, people want to collaborate with you to do research, somebody invites you to do a keynote on that topic, and this is what you call career acceleration. If 100 of you do that at Sunshine Coast, then you will very quickly move through the ranks of that knowledge domain and start to threaten the Sydneys, New South Wales, and Melbournes of the field. But I think my thing is that you could get those acceptance rates up to around 50% by doing all these things. But be nice, be polite, despite you wanting to rant at these people. But you want to make it as easy as possible for the reviewers and the editors to see what you did and to show it in a very professional, very nicely organized way. Will this take time? Yes. But it's well worth it if you do that. That's the end, but look, it's only the end of the beginning, because now it's up to you to take this advice under consideration, and maybe in future, and as I approach my dotage, I can come back and give some workshops on specific parameters of what I'm doing here. So I thank you very much, and if anybody has any questions or anything, I'm more than happy to answer or evade giving an answer.
Thank you very much for that presentation today, Dave. I found it particularly insightful. I hope you all did as well. I'm particularly worried about my plumbing though, because my lawn's about this high, and sorry for all the sick days that might be coming into USC Business Laurel. I'm sorry about that, but it was a very insightful seminar as well, and caused me to reflect quite a lot on what I've been doing well and potentially what I haven't been doing so well as well. So that's fantastic to know. I'd just like to open up to the floor. We've got about 5 to 10 minutes for some questions. Do we have any questions for Dave? So we got some Zooms. Yeah. All right. Okay. One. Do you have any advice when applying to A-tier journals how to get a fee waiver for publication? Fees can be $3,000.
I do not have advice, because in the tourism area, none of the top-tier journals have that fee. It's actually a problem I've never had to deal with. I only once had to deal with that with the geography journal. I don't see, if it's something really, really compelling that they want to publish, I think you just have to be a bit cheeky and make the argument that, look, this is really good and I can't afford the fee, or try to negotiate a reduced fee or something. But we don't have that issue in tourism, to be blunt. Yeah. Have you ever had that, Brent? No.
Okay, any questions from the floor?
Yep.
Just there, sorry. Just run around. I need the exercise. All right.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in your thoughts about putting forward a special issue of a journal and how the journal understands that. Is that something that they appreciate? And what is bang for buck in terms of your personal profile, not necessarily just the universities, but your own? How does that sit with promotion matrix, etc.?
Yeah, I think as long...
You need to talk into this one, sorry.
Ooh, it's very scary. Don't anybody dare take a picture of this.
Ali, please take a picture.
Special issues. Look, I think as long as they're
I'm serious,
as long
Ali.
as it's following all the normal protocol. I mean, normally to do it right. I mean, look, there's some dodgy ways of doing it where people are invited, and that it's sort of a token non-blind process, and I would avoid that like the plague. But I've done special contributions to special issues, and the way that's credible is if, so think about this, whether you're responding or initiating it, is that you just issue a call, through, like we have a organization called TriNet, so it's the online communities where somebody says, look, call for papers. So no guarantee, but let's say we get 32 manuscripts submitted, and sometimes there's a screening process equivalent to a desk rejection or not, where, well, we don't want to make a lot of work for people, so maybe we end up with 18 good manuscripts, and then we put them through the normal blind refereeing process, as any other article, and that's just as legit as any other kind of article. And one big advantage of it is that then people know, oh, if this was a special issue on ecotourism and there's 8 manuscripts there, a lot of people are going to go out of their way to look at that, knowing that there's 8 things all in one spot that they could potentially cite if they're doing work in ecotourism. So I think it's a great idea. Sometimes those things can even go into an edited book, which is not a prestige indicator, but it can be just a great way of amplifying citation counts and things like that and giving it to people in an accessible kind of way. So yeah, I'm a big fan of special issues as long as it's done in a way that does not in any way contradict the normal double-blind refereeing process.
I think that's very sage advice, Dave. Does anyone else from the floor have any questions?
Coming back to your idea of the sexy title,
Right.
Do you think it's a better idea to be a little bit more generic with the title so then it could be more applicable and perhaps generate more citations? Or do you think focus more specifically on your content? Or I guess I'm struggling with the term of a sexy title.
Both, because this is what subtitles are for. So in general, like with our ecotourism article, it was 20 years on. Oh, what's 20 years on? It makes people a bit curious. And then something that specifies what you're doing. Yeah, like so I've got papers like that I can cite where, okay, there was one, I had this weird research idea some years ago where sometimes an attraction disappears. You know, and the classic example of that is the pink and white terraces over in New Zealand. It's destroyed that was New Zealand's #1 tourist attraction. It's totally destroyed. And there's another example, the Old Man of the Mountain in New Hampshire in the United States, where the old man's face fell off in a rock slide, and that was their iconic natural symbol. So they were really wondering, well, what does this do to our tourism? So I wrote an article about it with Laura, and we got it published. And the main title was, "Just because it's gone doesn't mean it isn't there anymore." And that people got curious about that, and the subtitle said, "Dealing with attraction residuality of lost attractions." See, so you can have something up front that's just sort of catchy and sexy, dare I say, and then a subtitle that gives you some more specific idea. So you get both the catch, the hook, and something that gives you some knowledge about what the paper's about. So that's what subtitles are for sure.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Just one more from the floor before I hand over to Beth.
Thank you. Similar to the title question, how do you handle the possibility of blind review if you want to theme all of your titles so they all start with the same thing?
Oh, I would never do that.
Really?
No, I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
Sometimes what authors will, or what editors will do, if you have something really compelling where you can say, look, this has 3 articles in a row, and each one is 10,000 words, so each one is a full article, and you submit them all at once, and they put them all simultaneously through the blind review process, and they say, great, we're going to publish them here, here, and here, maybe in consecutive issues, then it would be perfectly okay to say, tweaking the beard of the franchise kings A, and then same title B and C, and then a different subtitle in each case. That would be okay. But if you've already published something with an interesting like a main title, you couldn't then go and use it again for another one because, well, maybe you could. Maybe you could, because so if it was something like 20 years on, subtitle, a commentary on Weaver and Lawton 2008. It might be you doing the commentary. If I screwed up in the first one, I'm going to update it and fix it now, or somebody else doing that, then it would be okay. So if the title in some way would indicate or not indicate that it's the same author carrying it forward, then I think you get away with it. But I think you'd want to get some advice on that, or maybe even the editor would say, look, this kind of gives it away, and you have to be a bit careful about that. But potentially you could do it. Generally, it's not considered a good idea, though.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dave. I'll just hand over to Beth very quickly.
Oh,
Hello. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Beth from the library. I'm just interested that David said he's going to be in his dotage soon and will come back and help us. He's not very dotaging at the moment. So in the meantime, the library can offer you a lot of help and support in a lot of the issues that he's been talking about. And if you're not in the business area and you're not graced by the Dean's A, B and C list, it's a lot more complex to work out where are good places to publish. So we've got a team of liaison librarians who can help you make a lot of those decisions about where to publish and how to make the decision about where to publish as well. So please contact your liaison librarian. There's a lot of things that have been discussed today that we can actually help you with and support you with and put you in touch with some resources that can help you along the way as well. So you should all know your liaison librarian by now, so please don't hesitate to contact them in this area because it's really critical for the university and for your career to do it right the first time and not waste 10,000 words of effort on a dud journal, basically. Thank you. Thank you.
Right, some more sage advice. I think that was absolutely fantastic. We'll just finish off by showing SCU's appreciation for Dave coming up today to deliver this seminar. I'm not sure whether you do. I think I've got my eye on that actually. That's very nice for a speaker. Thank you very much for the presentation today, Dave, and thank you for everyone. Thank you to everybody who participated in the organisation of the seminar as well. It's duly acknowledged and greatly appreciated, and I really hope that it's helped you all on your journey towards publishing in top-tier journals. See you all soon.